I believe my screen is visible.
Yes, it's coming up. Yes.
Yeah. So today I would be giving a quick overview of hidden Markov models. Uh, Hidden Markov models are a very powerful statistical modeling tool that are used in a variety of places like speech recognition, handwriting recognition, etc. So let's take a step back and see what kind of questions can a hidden Markov model help answer, and what is their impact in the field of natural language processing. Let's say if you want to understand what is the probability of observation of a specific sequence, we can use forward and backward algorithms in that. What is the reason for that observation that happened? What is the reason for an observation? We can use the vertebrae algorithm for that. What can I learn from observation with the data that I have? We can use Baum-Welch algorithm. These are sort of the questions that we can use hidden Markov models to answer. So diving a bit deeper, what is the composition of a hidden Markov model? Hidden Markov model primarily comprises of hidden states, observation symbols, and they rely heavily on probability distributions. So it's a probability distribution of transitions from initial state to initial hidden state. We're going to discuss more about these in the later slides. Probability distribution of transition to terminal states. In most of the cases, it's excluded because we're usually ending at one specific state. So usually the probability is equal to 1. And state transition probability distribution and state emission probability distribution. So let's understand these terms in a bit more detail. Hidden states and observation symbols. Let's say if you want to understand or you're trying to figure out the mood of your friend. Now, mood is essentially a hidden state, but you observe their actions to figure out how their mood is. Now, the actions here are observable symbols. And from these actions, you observe and make a guess about the hidden state in which they are. Your friend's activities, which are hidden states, emit observable symbols. Now, the keywords over here are essentially hidden states, which are hidden values that you're trying to figure out. Observable symbols, these are the clues that you get inside a sentence or the language, and these are the ones that you try and figure out hidden states with. And emit, so emission states are essentially the hidden states which emit certain observable symbols, certain characteristics with which you figure out what that sentence actually means. State transitions. So let's take an example. Let's say if we have three hidden states, B, F, G, and we have three observed states, S, C, R. Now that we know that what are our hidden states and what are our observed states, we create something called as a state transition table. So what we do here is that we pick up all the hidden states and we calculate the probability according to whatever the sentences are, whatever the task at hand is. So we calculate the probability from getting B after we've gotten B, probability of getting B after we've gotten F. Similarly, we build the entire probability table. So if we have three hidden states, we'll have 3 into 3, that's 9 actual in the probability variables that we can use to construct something known as a state transition probability distribution diagram. This is essentially just a diagram that depicts the table that we already have. So let's say if we have B, and then we have to figure out the probability of getting B after B, we can simply transition from B and then go back to B, and we get the probability as 0.3. This helps us visualize easily what's actually happening inside the entire system. So once we've got our state transition probability distributions done, now we're going to move to emissions. So now we're going to take care and we're actually going to link the hidden states with the observed states. Now, earlier on, we had the hidden states connecting with the hidden states. Now we're connecting the hidden states with a certain observable symbol. So now we can construct same probability distribution table, but now we're talking about emissions. So what are the kind of properties that we actually observe from the hidden state? Once we've gotten those, essentially what we have to do is build that same diagram. So let's say if we wanted to know that if we see the hidden property B in that certain sentence, what does that actually mean? What does this translate to in a tangible manner? It must translate to a tangible observed symbol. So let's say if we had to understand what is the probability of getting B and then we get C. So we transition from B to C and we have a probability of zero point 0.3. Similarly, we can combine this entire knowledge that we have. And if we were to create a summation of the parts, let's say if we were starting at an initial state and then transitioning to B and then go to terminal state, and considering the terminal state is same for all sentences, we just take the probability 1. So in this manner, we can create an entire probability distribution from the initial state to the terminal state, and we can develop deep relations between hidden states and observed states. These are the core concepts that will help you build more complex algorithms, as we discussed earlier, like PerTB and many more, that will help you analyze in a much deeper manner what kind of sentences and what do the words that you actually see mean. So they actually preserve the contextual integrity of the entire sentence and actually help you learn in a much, much better manner. So this was essentially a quick overview of hidden Markov models. Thank you.
All right. So thanks, Anudit. So next is, I think,
Definitely. Ma'am,
Aniket.
I also had another question. I have my entire report prepared. So do I submit this report along with the presentation on LMS? Just like, is there anything else required?
No, nothing else is required, and link is available on LMS. You can submit.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll
Zip
submit
file in
as
a zip.
soon as it. Sorry.
Hmm.
Yeah, ma'am. वो zip
Yes,
file
you
me
can.
submit. Okay.
Mhm.
Sure. Stop sharing. Thank you.
Oh, all right. So next is Aniket, I think. Let me.
Yep, it's Aniket.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, you can share your screen. So,
Uh,
any doubts about hidden Markov models? Anything that was not clear? Just remember transition probabilities and emission probabilities. So basically in emission probabilities, you have to check while you are after you have attached tags with each and every word in the sentence. First of all, you have to calculate a transition probability, which is basically movement from one POS tag to another POS tag. Basically, from one state to another, and you have to calculate the emission probability basically, and that is what are the chances of occurrence of a particular word in a particular POS tag. So while training the model, you need to calculate first transition metrics and then emission metrics. That's all. Yes, Aniket.
yes, ma'am. I'll just share my screen. And today I'll be explaining RNN, and we'll be looking more into how RNN is used for text processing. Uh, what are recurrent neural networks? So, as the name suggests, it's a neural network, but there are different kind of neural networks. They have this thing called timestamp, which makes them time dependent on how the data is processed. Essentially, every cell takes output not only from the previous layer or the input, but also from the recurrent cell before it. There are different ways of feeding input into RN, which we will see in a while. And they have this internal memory, which is also known as the hidden state. And recurrent neural networks are pretty good for sequences of data. They work very well with sequences of data, whether it be generation or inference from the text. And some popular examples are LSTM and GRU, which were created because of the shortcomings of the conventional or the vanilla recurrent neural network. And why do we need an NLP? Is because we have seen approaches like bag of words, TF, IDF, and word to vec. So what happens is sequential information is often lost because we only have word by word probability, or in the vector we have word by word probability of it. Even though a word to vec has some retains some sequential information, a lot of it gets lost. So we turn towards recurrent neural networks, and uh, they are used in like translation, like if you have like English to French translation, or language to language translation, image captioning, and there are two ways of going for image captioning. You can either use conv LSTM cells, or you can first process the image through a convolution network and then feed it to an RNN. And text generative models can also be based on RNNs. More on RNNs is that the output is generated not only with respect to but also with respect to time. So what this means is, as we discussed a bit earlier, that how the data is dependent not only on previous state but also on the output of the previous neuron. So this can help in uh, gauging the state, like for in time series analysis, which we generally do not do in NLP. But what ARIMA or models like ARIMA do is they take an interval before a point, and then they try to predict the next instance, whether maybe it's stock market prediction, it's going up or down. But what RNN does is it looks at the entire series, and it can also learn from previous approaches and previous falls and climbs of the time series. So this is essentially a model of a RNN. This is as you can here see is x1, x2, x3 can be our input. Let's see this. Like the movie was, while this uses here binary softmax, so this is for sentiment analysis. What we have here is like this is how the input is fed, and and it's fed into a function. H0 is the first hidden state. This is generally initialized to be 0 in most trivial cases. And what happens is, like, once x1 is fed and h0 is fed, x1 gets multiplied to w, and h0 is 0, and it's essentially multiplied to w and added, and then we get h1. So h1 is also our y1, and this is again fed into f of w, which is the same function. So this is, if this were a single neuron, uh, uh, and we have unrolled that neuron, this would and data gets is kept feeding into it, and we get losses from every individual. uh, let's say this is a translation model, and what we do is we feed the in English, and we are getting some output, and we have some output already in French, and we can calculate the losses here, and all the losses are summed. So this would be the forward propagation. What happens in backward propagation is, when once the loss is calculated and we want to update the gradients. So one essential way of doing this is we perform gradient descent on every layer, and we calculate uh, the gradient updates for every step, and then it's summed and added to the entire weight for the entire backward propagation. But if this were a multi-layer, and like this is the depth, and this is how the time is defined, or in our case how text is defined as a. So in that case, what will happen is every step would be taken in, like, similarly in, if it were a feed forward network, first it would happen for the outer layer, then for the inner layers, and so on and so on. uh, Now this is a like that was a many to many model. This is a many to one model. In this, instead of getting individual outputs, what we do is we just feed them. We do not keep track of these outputs, and we just get one final vector which we can feed into binary softmax classifier or any other softmax classifier for if we have like sentiment analysis in 3 dimensions. We have positive, negative, and neutral. We can use it for that. These are some more examples like which we have already discussed. There's also this thing called visual question answering, and like if we have some questions and we have an image, so both the data can be fed and a generative model can be defined to get the output of whatever the generated text is. Like yeah, that was the end of it.
All right. So any questions, any doubts in RNN? Can you go back to that slide where that
This one.
where that model was, where the whole, yeah, this one. Okay, so in terms of text, suppose you have a sentence, so how do we give the sentence as input in the model? Previous slide.
This one.
Okay, over here. So you can see word by word it's mentioned. So basically, this RNN is unrolled over time. So this green boxes, I must say, so this is giving output at every time step. So any doubts to anyone about this? So can anyone tell me how weights are shared in this RNN?
Should I?
Okay, yes, Aniket.
So basically, singular weight can be assigned to all the functions, or different. They can be initialized with uh, L1 initialization, L2 initialization. But generally, the weights are shared between these and these cell blocks.
Mm-hmm.
At
Yes.
least,
Uh, mhm.
like at least in many to many models, when we have single layer.
Right. So weight sharing is important to be noted in any sequential model. And one more thing, how do we initialize these weights? Are you sure like we initialize these weights by zero in this?
Ma'am, no, ma'am, these weights are not the weights, the H0 state, the hidden zero state.
Okay. Yeah, weights are not initialized to zero, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So we give some random value as input to these weights.
Yes, ma'am. Or
Yes.
we initialize them using some other metric that we have. Uh,
Okay. All right. So any doubts about this, anyone? Okay. Okay. All right. So thanks, Aniket. Next is
okay, thank you,
Manav.
ma'am.
Okay.
ओ- ओके मैम प्रेजेंट तो बना दो
Yes. Go ahead, please.
मैम इज इट विजिबल
Yes.
ओनली द स्लाइड्स राइट नॉट द टैब्स
Tabs are also visible.
चलो कोई नहीं ओके मैम सो वेट आई एक्चुअली ट्राई टू फुल स्क्रीन ही है बट आई एम नॉट श्योर Yeah, so ma'am, my topic was GRUs for text, and to start with an introduction. So they were basically introduced in 2014 by something et al. I can't pronounce the name, and they're kind of like LSTMs, but with forget gate, and they have fewer parameters than LSTMs. From what I could find, they show better performance on certain smaller and less frequent data sets, but on bigger data sets, they have similar performance to LSTM. So GRU versus LSTM, if someone had to make the comparison, doesn't really have a clear answer. It's more a matter of preference, or it's basically empirical in nature. So like you just try and see what works. So their importance is basically that they're able to store and filter information using their update and reset gates. This totally eliminates the vanishing gradient problem because the model is not, washing out the new inputs every time on every single time step. And this basically keeps the relevant information and passes it down to the next time steps of the network. And if carefully trained, they can sort of perform well even in complex scenarios, unlike traditional models. So how do they work? So the photo on the right is basically, an unrolled GRU. So now we'll just basically look at or quickly revise how one single GRU cell works. So they basically have two main gates called the update gate and the reset gate. Just
Uh,
like the gates in, yes, ma'am.
Manav, I think screen is, you need to zoom in a little bit. Too small.
Manas, full
Screen is.
screen. You'll have to go to full screen.
Actually, I'm actually using presenter view. So like, uh, using it to control slides. Is it better now, ma'am?
Yes. Yes. Yes, it's fine now.
Yeah. So yeah, so this is a single GRU cell, and it basically has two gates: the update gate and the reset gate. Just like the gates in LSTMs, sort of these gates are like trained to selectively filter out any irrelevant information while keeping what's useful, which makes sense because we're dealing with long sequences of words here. And these gates are essentially vectors containing values between 0 and 1, where 0 is a value that indicates that corresponding data in the input or the hidden state is unimportant and will be discarded, and therefore the gate is 0. On the other hand, a 1 value in the gate vector means that the data is sort of important and will be used. In to basically, it all boils down to the reset gate, which is used for the model to decide how much of the past information it wants to forget, whereas the update gate basically helps the model determine how much of the past information, that is from the previous time steps, need to be passed along to the future. So a combination of both basically makes GRUs robust to sequential data. And we're going to take the example of something called multi-layer bidirectional GRU for text. It's just a complicated name, but in practically it's pretty simple. This is basically a modification made on the normal sort of RNN network, where it can adjust to an important need in the NLP problem. As you can see here, this is basically an example of two sentences. The first sentence is hi, he said teddy bears are on sale, and in the next one, instead of bears, it's Roosevelt. Roosevelt was an American president. So here, to sort of differentiate between the two different meanings of the word teddy, we would need to look at the subsequent word, and this is the reason why we apply bidirectional networks. That is, it goes both sides. So here in this diagram, as we can see, it basically applies forward propagation two times. One for the forward cell and one for the backward cell. And similarly, backprop in time also happens in both directions. And according to this equation, you can see that both the activations, like the forward activation and the backward activation, would be considered in the calculation for the final YT, that is the predicted output. And yeah, so and that was the previous one was basically bidirectional networks. The next one is multi-layer networks. So I'm explaining them separately. So to achieve even better results, we can basically stack the layers of LSTMs or GRUs on top of each other. This GIF basically shows how the GRU is unrolling in time. And the deeper network is obviously computationally expensive and intensive, but overall performance is improved. And since we are working with RNNs, we must take into consideration the time factor. So therefore, the horizontal sort of uh, horizontal row is the layers, and the vertical columns are the different time steps. And yeah, so this is just another sort of to visualize how it works. To get the value of any activation layer, we need to use both the previous one, that is the previous activation in time, as well as the previous activation from the previous layer. So basically, the red one, to calculate the red one, you need the green one and the blue one. The green one is basically from the same layer but the previous time step, and the blue one is from a different layer but the same time step. So you can see the dependency here, and in the ultimate equation that is used to calculate the red activation, we use both. Yeah. This is the last part where we'll look at one application. So one application could be of text summarization, which the decoder here is made up of bidirectional multi-layer GRU, and we're just using an attention head on top of it, which is basically attention is simply put, basically tells us which words are important from our input, and these two outputs would generate a probability distribution over all of our vocab, and this is called the vocabulary distribution. So it basically helps us in generating the final output. We have two important distributions here. So one is the local distribution, which is made by the attention head, which tells us which words are important from an input sentence, and this local distribution is further used to build the global distribution, which tells us the probability of relevance of output according to all the words in the vocab. So this helps us in text summarization, and yeah, I think that's it. Thank you.
All right. So thanks, Manav. Any questions about this GRU? Anything? Okay. So next is
There
Aryan.
was a question, but not about GRUs. The bidirectional networks, they can be implemented in normal neural networks as well. Is there some way to do that?
Neural networks are like traditionally feed forward networks, right? From what you have learned and what we have learned. So like going both ways won't really work for them because they're usually feed forward. That's why we use bidirectional LSTMs, because in this case, the forward pass happens in both directions as well as the backward pass. It also happens in both directions. So we have gradients on both sides. So two sets of gradients basically.
Yeah, but I was asking whether is there any methodology which maybe we can use in normal neural networks, not GRU related.
So you're saying is there any method for normal neural networks to go like both ways, right? That's what you're trying to say.
Yeah. Is there even a use case if anyone has ever heard of where we might need to
That's
do something like that?
That's an interesting question. I have never seen such a thing. And even if there was such a thing, it probably wouldn't be called neural networks because they're traditionally feed forward.
One thing, so Aniket, so data, whatever we give as input in the neural network is in the form of features. It's not, we are not talking about dependencies. So if you are, you can consider we are not talking about dependencies between features in neural network. So in bidirectional networks, that is a sequential model like GRUs, we have dependencies in the features, whatever we are giving as input. So that is why. So at that time, bidirection is important. We are training left to right and right to left. That is important. But in a simple neural network, if whatever feature I'm giving as input, so that sequence is not there. So I think bidirectional concept should not be there. I'm not sure because I've not heard of such thing, but that's what I'm thinking. There's no dependency among features. So
Yeah, that makes sense.
okay. So next is Aryan, I think.
Yes, ma'am. Could you give me presenter access, please?
Yes,
You
you are.
already done that. Just, 1 second, ma'am. Just check. Hello.
Oh, yes, we can hear you.
Yes, ma'am. Just a second. Do let me know if my screen is visible, ma'am.
Yes, it's visible.
Okay. So, ma'am, my topic today is LSTM for text. We'll just go through it, and one second, I think it stopped sharing. I'm so sorry, ma'am. Hello.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So today we're going to look at LSTM for text and understand basically why it is crucial and how does it actually work, the constituents of it, and why is it different from RNN or GRUs as Manav and Aniket pointed out. Right. So LSTM stands for long short term memory. So it's basically an adaptation of RNN. And unlike standard feed forward neural networks, LSTM has a feedback connections. So which also like timestamping is there. It takes memory into consideration. So it gives it capabilities not only to process single data point but also entire streams of data. So instead of pictures, it can do videos and all as well. Right. So here we just look at what a neural network is basically. So a neural network is just a series of algorithms that try to find underlying relationships that basically try to mimic how our brain thinks. So that also makes them capable to change themselves to say adapt to any changes in the input so that they do not have to redesign the output criteria, right? And again, as we have already seen that these LSTM is different from a standard neural network, so it allows it to be adaptable in the way that the input and the output does not have to be defined the same. They don't have to be the same length, and that does not have to be defined beforehand. Right. So here are some basic applications of how LSTM actually works. So we have speech recognition in the way that I can speak and it can recognize that. Right. We have music composition that basically we can feed streams of music which can help our model learn and basically compose music on our behalf. We could have grammar learning. We can teach them how our language actually works, how we and we could train it to do language modeling and other things. We could also upload images of handwritten pages and notebooks and texts and make the model learn it so it can recognize and learn our handwriting and not only recognize and understand it, say in terms of an OCR, but also replicate it. We can do text summarization, which basically means that given a long paragraph, a long stream of data, we can summarize that data in say a couple of lines in a short
Yes,
format.
please. Yes. Move to next slide.
Oh, sure. So here we talk about the composition of LSTM. So LSTM basically we look at majorly look at three kinds of gate and the cell. So the cell is responsible for basically remembering the values over all the provided inputs and the generated outputs. The input gate is responsible for feeding the data to the cell, and it filters out the data as to what should be and what should not be fed. The output gate chooses what information, what given presented output, what presented output should be. So what information should be removed or kept in the final output. And this takes into consideration the previous output and the current input. It uses it as a regulator, which also comprises of the sigmoid function. Forget gate it decides to as to which information is important enough to be stored and which is to be forgotten. Thus, this optimizes the performance because we have huge streams of data, so it makes it easier for the system to work in the given time. And this also takes into consideration the previous cell's output and the current input. Right? This is just a way of basically we're finding out the next character and on an example word. This is us basically generating next words in a sequence. So as you can see, we have the seed sequence here. The man is walking, and then we predict down, then predict the street, and then we predict the full stop. So this is how we are completing and basically generating text to complete a sentence word by word. So this is basically the basic working of the system. So as we can see on the right, we can very clearly see that we have our input, we have our basic data stream going through a sigmoid function, going through a tanx function, going taking input from the input gate as well, and then going into the cell, which in turn gives its output to the input gate, the output gate, and for it to be presented to us, it goes again through a sigmoid function or tanh function, and it goes out. We also have a forget gate that takes the input from the cell and processes it to a tanh function, gives it to the cell again, which is used for processing, and that is how basically an LSTM works.
No.
So
So yes. So you need to So please go back to previous slide.
Sure.
So which gate decides the present cell states?
Sorry, ma'am.
Which gates decide the present cell state?
Mm, Ma'am,
Input gate and forget gate decides the present cell state, and
right.
output gate only passes uh, it to the
For
next.
presentation. Yes.
And the amount of memory that is stored and that is to be forgetted is decided by
Okay.
in
Yes.
forget gate.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Right. May I move ahead, ma'am?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. So we'll just look into why LSTM is basically used. So as Manav also said that it's good for larger data streams and it's comparable to GRUs in that sense, and it completely solves the problem of vanishing gradient, and it has a higher accuracy than RNN. RNN can also be adapted to like simply RNN can be adapted to text generation. That also is solved here. It is, and also an LSTM basically uses a separate memory cell that maintains information for a longer period of time. So that is why it is slightly better than RNN as well. And this is that completes it.
All right. So any questions? Anything? Now you all have to explain like why three gates are required in LSTM and why only one gate in GRU.
I had a question for Aryan.
Yes, please.
भाई तूने पीपीटी किस पे बनाई है ये वाली कौन सा प्लेटफॉर्म?
Canva.
अरे कैनवा है, ठीक है।
Yes.
इसमें प्रेजेंटर मोड होता है क्या?
हाँ होता है ना, से वो प्रेजेंट करके ना देयर आर 3 ऑप्शंस, तो उसमें स्टैंडर्ड से वो फुल स्क्रीन होता है, प्रेजेंटर में वो 2 बना देता है।
उसमें नोट्स दिखाते नहीं आते हैं?
नोट्स उसमें नहीं आते, प्रेजेंटर करके एक ऑप्शन होता है उसमें नोट्स आते हैं सेपरेट डिस्प्ले
अच्छा
पे देखते हैं।
ठीक है, कूल कूल कूल,
यस।
थैंक। सॉरी मैम, आप कुछ कह रहे थे।
अब क्वेश्चन पे आ जाते हैं। तो क्वेश्चन ये था कि 3 गेट्स क्यों है LSTM में और 1 गेट क्यों है GRU में? उसका क्या एडवांटेज और डिसएडवांटेज है 3 गेट्स और 1 गेट होने का?
हाँ मतलब वो काम तो सेम ही कर रहे हैं, बस एक के पास गेट्स कम है, एक के पास ज्यादा है। एलएसटीएम आई थिंक पुराना है काफी आर्किटेक्चर, तो मतलब आई मीन पर्पस तो दोनों सेम ही ऑलमोस्ट कर रहे हैं, बस 2
तो
गेट हैं जीआरयू के अंदर, क्या?
LSTM, हाँ, द पर्पस इज फेयरली सिमिलर, लेकिन जैसे वही है कि द LSTM प्रोवाइड्स अ ग्रेटर कंट्रोल ओवर our model, but it's more or less the same function. Like the same function is going through the 2 gates there and the 3 gates here.
हाँ मतलब काम तो वही कर रहे हैं एट द एंड ऑफ द डे।
अगर सेम ही काम होता तो फिर नया आर्किटेक्चर को बनाने की नीड नहीं थी ना।
GRU does not use a memory unit, but it still does not
में
provide a
जी
differentiate.
Also, GRUs are easy, like faster to train comparatively.
यस राइट करेक्ट।
यस मैम, वो भी है।
GRU इज फास्टर क्योंकि उसमें एक तो इतने सारे एक्टिवेशंस इनपुट आउटपुट फॉरगेट ये सब नहीं है, और इसके अलावा LSTMs में जो 3 गेट होते हैं वो क्या करते हैं कि पार्शियल इंफॉर्मेशन स्टोरिंग और पार्शियल इंफॉर्मेशन लॉस के लिए होते हैं, वाइल GRU में क्या है कि आपको पूरा का पूरा या तो इंफॉर्मेशन लॉस हो जाएगी क्योंकि
Yes, correct.
तो उसमें तो दैट इज व्हाट कि LSTM में आप पार्शियली इंफॉर्मेशन स्टोर कर सकते हो, पार्शियली उसको आगे फॉरवर्ड कर सकते हो। तो आई थिंक दैट वाज इट। और इसमें अगर अभी सीक्वेंशियल मॉडल्स में और कोई डाउट है तो आप पूछ सकते हो, कोई भी चीज़।